last week when we talked about Enochian magic, because I see it as, I don't know, we talked about, and for people briefly, the subject of the lecture last week was Enochian magic, and which is, as we discussed, sort of a system of manifesting the apocalypse in terms that we get in the Book of Revelations. So what that involves, as far as I discussed before, was getting those 144,000 people that we're told are so significant, that they're the real people here to put this plan into motion, into their correct positions. So I think that it's a matter of what that person doing is advancing that plan, and that person is in their correct position, then that would be the equivalent of having that spiritual force. I wouldn't even say it's protection, it's more like, it's not protection any more than gravity is, you know what I mean? Just because they're going in the direction that everything else is going, so it's impossible to knock them out of that direction. And I think it would be, I think it would be very questionable as to what that's even going to mean, because we don't know what it's going to take for the direction. So that's why it's important to, when something doesn't work out, to like try and find out why, or try and find out what happened, and that's how we learn more about what this plan is and where it's going. Yeah, so that's one thing that I really strongly want to emphasize is if your back's to the wall and desperate about something, it's just take some time, let it simmer down, relax, get to a calm, orderly state of mind, and then do whatever it is that you have to do. How we do it. All right, I hope this provokes some thought for people, brings up some issues. I hope I'm not preaching anything too much. I just think that this subject raises some interesting questions, and thanks for coming.
Great, so I guess we could probably open up the floor for some discussion on the topic and stuff like that. I'm sure everybody's got, like, you know, further interest in discussion, that sort of thing. We've got the place until 8:30, I think it was. Yeah, so we've got another hour to hang out if you, if you guys feel like talking to me. One thing I did kind of want to do was hand this out. This, I think this is a really incredibly interesting read. I'm not trying to push anything on anyone or anything like that, but it's the Introduction from Magic and Theory and Practice by Alistair Crowley. And
whatever your ideology is definitely worth.
That's it, exactly. Reading. I'm not trying to push a particular ideology necessarily, but he gives a really great interpretation of, like, a great definition of magic and a great postulate on it, and a lot of really great insight into things. You can take it or leave it as you want to, but I thought I would print a bunch of these out and hand them out to anybody who doesn't already have a copy of the book. I think it's pretty, especially considering the initial discussion on. Considering the way that we started the discussion, talking about the ethical implications, it seems pretty on the nose.
What did you say? What do you have to construct the signal?
Basically, the way I usually do it. You know, there's one guy called Austin Osmond Spare, who did you could call him like the grandfather of chaos magic, basically. Like he yeah, S-P-A-R-E, and he usually goes by A.O. Spare. That's how his books are all signed. He came up with a way of using just compound letters, like the compound letters of someone's name, to come up with a design. There's also
Is it just like any kind of systematic method of generating those in your design?
Yeah, if you're going to use, it depends what method you're using. Like if you're using planetary magic, Heinrich Agrippa's planetary squares are good. Agrippa was actually I'm not sure if he's the mathematician that actually discovered this, or if he's just like had it handed down to him. But he basically had a system. You know, if you have a square number, you can put it in a box where every column and every row adds up to the same number. And so when he arranges numbers in that way and associates the numbers with letters and uses them to design sigils, so each one's are associated with a different planet. So like 4 for Jupiter, 8 for Mercury, etc., etc. And so if you're using planetary magic, then you use the planetary square associated with that energy. And the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn has a design called the Rose Cross, which is just the Hebrew alphabet on a sort of rose petal design, and they would transliterate the words or names or concepts into Hebrew and draw the sigil on the Rose Cross. So.
Just out of curiosity, the Golden Dawn of McGregor Mathers back then, was it ever, and Win Westcott, has it ever gone forward? Is there still a Golden Dawn?
Yeah, there's a
Lots of them.
there's
Oh,
a
there's
couple.
lots, but which one comes like from the root? Like Win Westcott and McGregor Mathers, their root was even further back, but they
Well,
were real.
there's some dispute about that, and there's
Everybody can dispute anything.
Yeah, well, that's just it.
We
right?
weren't alive then.
It's the thing with
1800s.
the existing orders now. I don't know that if anyone's claiming direct lineage, I say
I'm
they're
just
probably
curious.
not.
David Griffin claims direct lineage to Mathers, and I think Cicero to Rigardi. But I think Cicero actually has letters to prove some
Yeah,
of
I
his
know
stuff,
the Cicero
but-
connection is
Rigardi
legitimate.
was never really in the Golden Dawn as it was in the early 1900s, though. So.
Lineage is one of those things that I think people attribute more significance to than it's worth attributing to. Like it's like we have this with the AA all the time. It's like which is the true AA descended from who? It's like if it has the curriculum, it has the information. Then, as far as I'm concerned, it's worth looking at the information, worth looking at the curriculum, and evaluating it on terms of what they are teaching and what they're accomplishing, as opposed to necessarily who initiated them.
With correct lineage, there's a transference of energy,
I don't believe.
which exists. It does exist. It does definitely exist.
I think
But
that-
it could die. Doesn't mean, But when there is a correct lineage, there's a transfer of energy.
I think that there's a.
They call it. They used to call it the golden chain for ease.
Yeah.
And that certain chain is the flow of.
But if you actually look at where that
If it
phrase
exists.
comes from, because that phrase comes from Agrippa, and Levy talks about it later in his Doctrine and Ritual of
It
Transcendental
comes from
Magic.
Sanskrit. Comes way before that. It's called the Guru Parampara.
Yeah, but it's how it comes into the ceremonial magical orders that we're talking about as they adopt this
Oh yeah,
version of
but
it. And,
that's Western magic.
yeah, it is. And we were talking about Western
I
magical
know,
orders.
but
right now.
Western magic comes from the East.
Really?
Travels.
Yeah. Well, everything travels and everything can relate to
Yeah.
everything else. It doesn't mean that. To determine an ultimate point of origin for anything in the occult is very difficult because the history is not accurate.
True.
And people weren't trying to keep historical records. They were trying to hide them, actually. So that's what makes it very difficult to, within all terms of reason, make these kind of...
Right, but if you're looking at it from linear, not from a higher astral aspect, or even for higher than that, then the roots can be found. But logical, it may not seem correct. But from a deeper inner teaching, then there is a certain flow. It's the external teachings that don't see it, because they're broken up through time. But through the inner brotherhoods of occult brotherhoods that have existed from way beyond, there is a flow of energy. But it's not easy to find those, but they do exist.
Wouldn't the lineage really be just from a claim, like a third order contact? So really couldn't anybody that's in touch with their holy guardian angel or whatever you want to call a higher genius claim lineage? Because isn't that just what lineage is? Someone.
It depends on the order. In the AA, I would say that's correct.
Yeah.
And the AA is, as it's set up, is less concerned about it. The groups that claim to be AAs right now are more concerned about it, but I think that's because they're not really doing much else other than claiming their lineage. So yeah, no, I think that's very accurate, and I think that is in line with kind of what you're saying with the flow of energy. It's maybe it's accessible to people without being in direct contact. I think that the guru system has been prevalent in Western magic for a while, but I think it's a lot less necessary now than it was at one point in time, because we have access to more information than at any point in history, more occult information, really since the 90s when all this stuff came online. I mean, I'm a perfect example. I grew up in a reasonably small town in New Brunswick, and yet I had access to stuff that, I would have had to travel Europe for, and maybe then not even film physical copies. I would have had to know people. I would have had to be initiated into groups, because even though that didn't be the only way to get access to the books, whereas now I can go online and find it in 30 seconds. So that's a huge difference.